as you did about the Carters.
Well, I suppose with the Bushes... because of his absence, and so she's a strong, intelligent, independently minded woman who has her own set of friends here in Washington, as so many political wives do.
And 5 very successful children, and she says that she raised them, I think I've got these figures right, in the first 16 years of their marriage they had 17 separate places to live. And I think that's a trial that a political wife, we spend too little time thinking about how difficult things can be for them. It hasn't been easy for Nancy Reagan with Ronald Reagan on the road as much as he's been on the road.
We've got reporters, John, along the parade route. We've heard from Andrea Mitchell, and we've now got George Lewis along the Pennsylvania Avenue. George?
I'm on Constitution Avenue, just north of the Capitol, where the Reagans have just turned the corner. The scene that they'll be seeing in just a few minutes as they head west on Constitution Avenue, north of the Capitol, is streets lined with crowds on both sides. As they get to the west side of the Capitol, the crowd swells quite large. It'll be a few minutes before they get there because the parade is behind the bands, heading at about march speed, so I imagine we'll be averaging about 2 or 3 miles an hour as we go down Constitution and then turn on to Pennsylvania Avenue en route to the White House. And very enthusiastic crowds waving at the Reagans and the Bushes as they go down, heading toward the White House. Roger?
Well, it's me. Thinking about that photo truck that you see right in front of the Reagans, they have a wonderful view of the people on either side, but looking ahead, this is an interesting shot. You see the white truck with the television transmitting equipment on it, and just to the left there, you a moment ago had a better view of it, the truck full of photographers. There's a series of steps built on the back of that truck so they can take this picture. This is what the photographers see, and the Reagans, when they look forward, see just about only the photographers. They don't see much of the avenue.
There we go again, getting in the way of the story. Huh?
It's a media world. They're coming down the hill now on Constitution Avenue. And while they're going at this marching pace, we will pause and be back with more coverage of the inaugural parade after this. And there you see the George and Barbara Bush, the new vice president, and his wife. There to the left of your screen, Mr. Bush's familiar wave to the crowd. Stop draft registration, it says. Keep your promise. Anti-draft people talking to, trying to get a message to the president, new president. And there you see now coming down off the hill with the old Senate office building in the background there to the left, the presidential motorcade. Behind us on this picture is the phalanx of motorcycles and other troops which are leading this parade. The parade has assembled at various points along Pennsylvania Avenue and will just tuck in behind the president as he comes along. A lot of people out, cloudy, but not cold at all. People in these cars will, without their police escorts, disembark at the White House and climb into the reviewing stand, the heated reviewing stand that's there, built on the north lawn of the White House. And a view of the west front of the Capitol, dimly seen in the background there, the stand on which the President took the oath today. Well, Roger, I think our part of the coverage here is about to come to an end. The parade is underway. Everything here went well at the Capitol. It's been a pleasure working with you.
That has been nice, John. I've heard so much about you and how terrific you are and how much you know, and every bit of it came true.
Come back anytime.
All right.
We will be turning over now in just a moment after one or two brief announcements to Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley, who will be handling the parade. We'll be back with a very complicated nightly news tonight, I'm afraid. We don't know exactly where the hostages will be when nightly news is on the air, but you might have a look in. We'll have all the news on the hostages and a recap of the events here today. And then this evening, wherever those hostages are, NBC News is going to be making its main effort to bring you as quickly and as fully we can the story of their rescue, of their return to freedom. We're not sure when or where that will take place, but we'll do our best to bring it to you. So for Roger Mudd and me here at the Capitol, thank you very much. And now over to you, Tom and Jane.
Thank you, Roger and John, for warming up the day for us, so to speak. And it is getting a little warm in here, although it's a little overcast down at the White House, where we are expecting President and Mrs. Reagan anytime. They'll be in the reviewing stand right across the way.
The family is already there. I've been watching. Is that the young Cameron Reagan? Is that the child of Mike Reagan, who would be Ronald Reagan's only grandson? Has been making laps back and forth in front of the glass there. Also in the reviewing stand, awaiting the arrival of the President and Mrs. Reagan, are all of their friends and the very powerful people, the members of the cabinet. From the A to Z, as near as I can figure it from over there, is Ambassador Ann Armstrong to Jerome Zipkin. That is the A to Z of the reviewing stand as it stands now. Though if Lee Annenberg, the publisher, was within my eyesight, he would be the A and not Ann Armstrong.
We are seeing the traditional route of presidents who have been inaugurated coming down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol to take up their post to review the parade that has been organized for them, and then to take up their powers and their residency at the White House. We can tell you that this is expected to be a fairly brisk parade. That is, that there are not as many units as there have been in the past. It will not go on probably more than two hours or so. But what we can expect is a slightly different cadence here. We are told that normally parades go at the military cadence of 30-inch steps at 120 per minute. Now they're going to be at 28-inch steps, 110 a minute.
Tom, the national Christmas tree,
which they are now lighting, and they have lighted for the first time this day because the hostages are out of the Iranian airspace. They are free at last. And so this country can not only breathe a sigh of relief, we can get back to business as usual.
Second time, actually, isn't it? They lighted the tree for 10 minutes at the request of the hostage families, I believe, for 10 minutes only before Christmas.
It was 1 second for every day in captivity, or some formulation that they had worked out.
Yeah.
And they had lighted it actually briefly before that.
The phalanx of Secret Service men, Tom, walking aside the President's limousine reminds me the Secret Service had put up about 100 Secret Service types nearby the parade route here overnight, and the D.C. police ticketed all their cars overnight and towed them away. I don't think they had as difficult a time getting the cars back, by the way, as you and I went.
This is a part of the job that people who arrive at this station in life have had lots of practice for, because they have, in most instances, run very arduous campaigns where the motorcade is an integral part of American campaigning, of course. We'll be back with more coverage of the inauguration of Ronald Wilson Reagan right after this word. I'm Tom Brokaw, back with Jane Pauley as we overlook the reviewing stand where we await momentarily the new President of the United States and Mrs. Reagan, as you can see, making their way very slowly down Pennsylvania Avenue. They will be greeted in the reviewing stand by the new members of his official family and the old members of his personal family, including his grandson, his brother Neil, and Dr. Loyal Davis, who is the father of Nancy Reagan, someone that we haven't seen very much, but he was a great influence on her life, we are told, and somewhat of a political influence on the life of her husband, Ronald Reagan.
That, Tom, to belabor the obvious, is Reagan Red, which we have seen all over town, advertised in store windows. Nancy Reagan's favorite color, they say. And for television, she couldn't have chosen a better color. Watching her throughout the coverage this morning, a wide shot with 100 people, 1,000 people, you see Nancy Reagan because of the bright red dress.
Out there among all those people lining this parade route is NBC News correspondent George Lewis. George?
Yes, Tom, I'm riding in the parade. We're being told now to move it up, so maybe we'll be heading your way a little faster now. As the parade winds down Pennsylvania Avenue, Ronald Reagan is looking at enthusiastic crowds on both sides, some of them waving their state flags. A few demonstrators here and there, some demonstrating on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment, others belonging to pacifist groups, but primarily people just here to sightsee rather than to demonstrate, to wave at the new president and his wife, and the new vice president and his wife. John Chancellor reported a little bit earlier that the temperature was 56 degrees. It seems to have cooled down a bit since then. The clouds have come out. It's not quite as sunny as it was before. So it's a little bit brisk for Mr. Reagan as he waves to the crowd without an overcoat on, Mr. and Mrs. Reagan there. And as far as we can see, it's just wall-to-wall people. We had a rehearsal a couple of weeks ago for this event, and some of the cars that were involved in the presidential motorcade tried out the parade route, and the streets then were absolutely devoid of people. But now they're crowded all around, looking for a good vantage point, some of them perched to top statues on the sides of the streets. And that's what Ronald Reagan is seeing as he and Nancy go down Pennsylvania Avenue. I'd say we're averaging about 3-4 miles an hour. That should get us to the White House in about another 15 or 20 minutes. The parade route is just a little over a mile long, 1.2 miles long. And there you can see a magnificent view of the Capitol in the background as we head sort of northwesterly on the route that will take us to the White House. Some of the people, as I mentioned before, have the flags from their various states. Mr. Reagan should be passing now by a bunch of people who are carrying a California flag, some of his fellow Californians at this point. There is also a sign that the Reagans passed just a few minutes ago which says, "Bands start playing here." So when the bands that will be involved in the parade come to that point, I guess they'll strike up for the benefit of the crowds. Shortly, Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Reagan will be coming up on the bleacher area. The people who came here to sit in the bleachers will be paying between $15 and $100 for the seats. First Lady. As I said, climbing up one of the statues that line Pennsylvania Avenue. This is obviously a happy occasion because of the news of the hostages. Some of the people in the crowd have signs about Iran, And obviously there is that awareness among the people in the crowd that this is
Okay,
something
we'll be
happy
back with more coverage of the inaugural parade of Ronald Wilson Reagan as he makes his way down Pennsylvania Avenue to that reviewing stand over there. He'll be reviewing it with his new Vice President, George Bush, and the Marshal of this parade, General Omar Bradley. We'll be back with all of this in just a moment.
NBC News continues its coverage of the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, brought to you in part by Johnson & Johnson, where quality products for the American family have been a tradition for generations, and by Polaroid, makers of the revolutionary new Time Zero Supercolor, the world's fastest developing color film. Now reporting from Lafayette Park across from the White House, here are NBC News correspondents Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley.
Thank you very much. We're back overlooking the reviewing stand. Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Reagan are making their way slowly down Pennsylvania Avenue in a large presidential limousine at this hour, after having been sworn in at high noon here, Eastern Standard Time today. They will take their place at the front, right behind that bulletproof shield, and they will review a parade that is expected to last about 2 hours altogether.
Mike Deaver is over there in the reviewing stand. Of course, he is President Reagan's deputy chief of staff. I ran into him maybe a night or two ago. Washington has been bathed in the light of the full moon these last 2 nights. Have been glorious evenings, a little chilly and whatnot, and making what sometimes is painful small talk. I asked if he thought that new moon, the full moon was a good omen. I'm thinking maybe ripe and full or something. He says, what do you mean? Because the crazies come out during a full moon. I went to a better subject, but that with the crazies come out was his interpretation of the full moon over Washington.
They're now back in the limousine once again. They have closed the top to that. Why, we're not sure, but at any rate, they're back inside the limousine, fully enclosed. They are preceded by a phalanx of people, many of them there for security reasons, some of them for ceremonial reasons as well. Among those who are preceding the president as he comes down Pennsylvania Avenue are police escort from the District of Columbia, because after all, he does live in the city as well, and the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department here. Also, any number of military units as well. The U.S. Army Band, which is called Pershing Zone, the U.S. Army Platoon, the United States Marine Corps Platoon. A great military character to these parades that began really with the inauguration of James Madison. He reviewed some infantry units before he moved on from the Capitol over to the White House.
Tom, do you remember a month or 2 months ago, Ronald Reagan had considered disarming the inaugural parade so that all of these military bands, and there is a very definite military character that is to this parade, but he would have had them all carrying flags instead of rifles and sabers and authentic muskets you'll see. One troop will be carrying M16s. Well, obviously, the flag idea didn't work. The military apparently objecting that the flags would be unwieldy, but I think most importantly complaining that they would appear to be emasculated. So Ronald Reagan did not get his disarmed inaugural parade, but there aren't any May Day variety tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue. And interspersed with the military bands, of course, will be the high school marching bands and the university bands. Well, the Reagans are out again. The limousine is open once again, and they're waving to the crowd. There's an ERA flag, Tom, and that's the first one I've seen. I've been looking from our vantage point here near the reviewing stand. The National Organization for Women has an office which, by coincidence, is on Pennsylvania Avenue and fronts the parade route. Ronald Reagan is not a supporter of the amendment, but that is the first now distributed pennant that I have seen today.
We have two stories going on here in Washington today: the inauguration of Mr. Reagan as President of the United States and the freeing of the American hostages from Iran. We have more details on that end of the story now from Marvin Kalb, who is at the State Department. Marvin?
Tom, there are two things really from here. The first is that officials are telling me that the American ambassador to Greece, Robert McCluskey, has been instructed by now former Secretary of State Edmund Muskie that he is to see and talk with all 52 of the hostages when they land, as is now expected within the next hour or so, in Athens on their way to Algiers. This is very important to the State Department because they wanted an American to check to see that indeed all 52 hostages are there. They have already had a Swiss ambassador do this in Tehran. They have already had the Algerians check it out. But apparently for the final transfer of this money, the unfrozen assets, to go from the escrow account into Iran's full control, the United States insists upon Ambassador McCluskey seeing them, talking to them. That will now happen within the next hour or two. A second point here, which is pointed out by U.S. officials, which is kind of interesting, is that now that the hostages are out of Iranian control, our West European allies are in a melee rush to reestablish commercial ties with Iran. The European Economic Community says that it's dropping its economic sanctions against Iran. The British are saying that they are increasing their embassy staff levels in Tehran, and the French indicate that they'll be not far behind. Tom?
Or Jane. Thank you, Marvin
Jane,
Count
sorry.
at the State Department. Well, meanwhile, back at the parade that I guess is made all the more festive by the news that the hostages are coming home, that they are free. Let me tell you a little bit about the parade that you will be seeing. It emphasizes the equestrian. Ronald Reagan is a man of the West. Sure, he was born in Illinois, but he is a symbol of the American West, and the American West is the frontier symbol as much of the presidency that he will bring to the White House. And the symbol of the West is what else other than this Stetson hat? The horse. There will be, almost 500 horses in this parade, and almost every band, every military unit is interspersed with an equestrian unit. All variety of Arabian, Morgans, thoroughbred horses. And that apparently was Ronald Reagan's choice, galloping into the White House. We'll be back with more on the inaugural parade in a moment. First a message. We are back at the parade route. You see the President and Mrs. Reagan standing in the limousine waving to an enthusiastic crowd. 25,000 bleacher seats available, but you can assume that 1 million or more people will be lining the streets, either in the bleachers or standing, to catch a glimpse of the 40th President of the United States and Nancy Reagan. And it is a flag-waving crowd. You know, the inaugural parade is organized rather long before the President of the United States is elected in November. In fact, it begins the organization around October sometime by the United States military. The Armed Forces Inaugural Committee gets things underway, and it has a mission. All units in the military have a mission, and the mission of the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee is the planning, coordinating, and supervising the military participation in the 1981 presidential inaugural. Let's go down to the parade route. One of those perhaps tens of hundreds of thousands of spectators is NBC's own Andrea Mitchell. Andrea?
And Jane, what a wonderful vantage point we have right here from the bleachers. These are the $15 seats. We can see Ronald Reagan, the new president, Mrs. Reagan, and as Jane pointed out earlier, that red dress and pillbox hat certainly does stand out in that crowd and from the black limousine. The people here have been waiting for hours and hours, and you can see them waving their flags and shouting, and some of the people down on the street jumping up and down. The people in the bleachers aren't doing all that much jumping because these bleachers do shake and roll a little bit, but the crowd very excited. People that I talked to in the bleachers were mostly Republicans from out of town. The people down on the streets are mostly from the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia area, and most of them said that they wanted to come because it was an historic event. There's a great feeling of excitement in this crowd that the hostages have been released and that there is so much to celebrate. A lot of them are Reagan supporters, but some of them are just American citizens who are proud to be here and happy to be witnessing an inaugural parade. So they're not just parade fans, they are also people with a real sense of history here. And as you can see, it's a beautiful sight. It was warmer earlier. As George Lewis said earlier, the sun was out. It's a little bit chilly and it looks like it may be threatening to rain, but we're hoping that it holds up a bit longer. So the parade is heading your way, and a wonderful sight it is.
actually, that is not the parade. The parade follows President and Mrs. Reagan. We'll be back to show you more of it after this. Well, we're back along the parade route, and we're watching the reviewing stand in addition to, well, frankly, the reviewing stand is what Tom and I are seeing live. We're watching the parade on television like you are. And across from us in the reviewing stand, a lot of chatting going on, a lot of small talk. Looks like a party over there, and frankly, the only people I can see who are intently awaiting the, looking for the arrival of the president is Patty Davis. Patty Davis is the daughter of the Reagans, of course, and Ron Reagan. The motorcycles that are leading the parade now past the reviewing stand, finally, Tom and I are watching the parade live. They're in the formation of a V, and the reason they're in the formation of a V is to symbolize the theme of this parade, a new beginning, and the direction that the Reagan team is pointing for these next 4 years.
You are looking in the front row there, that's Neil Reagan on the right, on the front row. That's the president's brother. He has said that he's going to be totally out of sight for the next 4 years. He's not interested in being a famous presidential brother. Now you're seeing some of the military units that have been accompanying the president down Pennsylvania Avenue. They'll be drawing up in front of the White House here momentarily.
Ronald Reagan's brother Neil, Tom, is, as you observed, apparently didn't get the letter or ignored the advice. He's wearing a business suit and a red tie, not the formal wear that Ronald Reagan is wearing, the stroller, not the morning coat officially. Neil Reagan, being his own man, intends to be low profile, I guess.
They're very close, the brothers. Neil Reagan is a successful Los Angeles advertising executive, now retired, and he's been very close to his brother, and they both have the same youthful appearance. Neil Reagan's about 2 years older than Ronald Reagan, who is 69 to be 70 on February 6th.
Traditionally the first musical unit in the inaugural procession, and has been since Calvin Coolidge's inaugural parade in 1923.
I believe the correct title is The Caissons Go Rolling Along. Or maybe it's The Army Goes Rolling Along. We've got...
At least we know the words to the song, Tom.
That's right. Called Pershing Tone.
Reviewing stand appears to be going in time to the music. Those are American flags being waved back and forth rhythmically.
We'll have continuing coverage of this inaugural parade for President Ronald Reagan, and we'll have coverage of former President Jimmy Carter arriving back home in Plains, Georgia, in the south of Georgia, in just a few moments. But first, this message. Hello, we're back. Jane Pauley trying to take a look up Pennsylvania Avenue for her own vision of President and Mrs. Reagan coming down that famous
Why, I believe
avenue.
it's George Lewis, Sam Donaldson, and... oh, I'm sorry. That's Ronald Reagan.
You'll begin to hear the more rusty cheers along the parade route. These are the people who worked hard for Ronald Reagan and paid for their seats, up to $100. for the seats that are closest to the presidential reviewing stand. They're bleacher seats, no fancier than others. The proximity is a little better, of course, and you have an uninterrupted view. Lots of American flags in that group.
I had to explain my reference to our news correspondents, our own George Lewis, who was leading a part of the parade, riding in an open convertible and reporting on it. We'll be getting reports from him, as we have throughout the morning. Good work, George.
The president seems to have spotted someone that he knows in the crowd that he's waiting to. A lot of Californians came here for this. It was a long trip for them, of course, but he was governor out there 8 years, a resident of that state for a long time, a genuine Westerner. Not just those famous Californians that we have been seeing, like Jimmy Stewart and Robert Stack and others, but people who worked for him as a Republican governor for a long time. Now he is drawing abreast the reviewing stand, as you can see. Those, some of the newly most powerful people in the world, and soon to be among the best known in this country. Familiar faces to us, just beginning now. Members of the cabinet. Ronald Reagan, Secretary of Treasury. James Watt, Secretary of Interior. Alexander Haig, Secretary of State. William French Smith, Attorney General. Today, cheering the man who put them in their post, Ronald Reagan. And then some faces who have been here before, too, in that reviewing stand.
A lot of cowboy hats in that crowd as well, Tom, being there often and saluting the man from the West.
Pretty well reached the end of the parade route for President and Mrs. Reagan now at 17th and Pennsylvania. We'll be going into the White House grounds for the first time as the occupants of that. We are about to see pictures of Vice President and Mrs. Bush, and they're having a grand time. They're encouraging everybody to cheer them on. For those of you familiar with Washington, that's 17th and Pennsylvania, that next intersection up there, and on the left is the old Executive Office Building. That's about where the parade will stop. The President and Mrs. Reagan will come back into the White House grounds, as I say, take their place at the front of the reviewing stand with the Bushes and also with General of the Army Omar Bradley, who made a very touching appearance at a gala last night. We'll be seeing him later on. Because, in addition to being President of the United States, Ronald Reagan is now Commander-in-Chief as well.
Picking up a little speed there. When the President and Mrs. Reagan do arrive on the reviewing stands themselves, then their parade can begin.
The new President of the United States. The 40th President, according to some. This, the 39th President, as he arrives back in Georgia. Live pictures now from what may be a rainy day in Georgia. A press corps assemble for the return of James Earl Carter to his homeland. We're told that beneath that umbrella somewhere, Ms. Lillian has come out to greet her son. And he's giving her a greeting embrace. You can just see her in the background there. He'll be now going to a covered dish dinner in his hometown of Plains, among the people that he knows best in the world, even after having been President of the United States for 4 years. There'll be a helicopter there. Maxine Reese, one of his friends, has organized a kind of big welcome home Jimmy rally.
And it is a bash, Tom. They intend to eat and be merry and dance and celebrate the homecoming of Plains' favorite son.
He may not be in Plains very long. He is scheduled to go to Wiesbaden, West Germany, to greet the American hostages when they arrive there. We are told that they are due in Athens for a refueling stop before too long. He was denied the opportunity as President of the United States, to say to this country, the hostages now are free after 48 hours of final, frantic negotiations. There's a man who seems to be at peace with himself, nonetheless.
Tom, his unfinished business apparently is finished now.
We'll be back with more of Jimmy Carter's return to Plains, Georgia, with the inauguration parade of President Reagan and all of these festivities in Washington, D.C., in Plains, Georgia, and wherever the news takes us on this extraordinary news day. But first, this message. Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Reagan now have entered the White House grounds. The limousine has pulled up. They will go through their new residence. They've already checked it over and said they'd like to stay. Thank you very much for the next 4 years. And then they'll come out to the reviewing stand. And while they are doing that, ex-President Jimmy Carter, still called Mr. President, of course, by his friends and his staff, has arrived in Plains, Georgia, to a sea of umbrellas and some what appears to be light rain. That's the site in downtown Plains, Georgia, the best known of small towns in that state, certainly, one of the best known small towns in this country for the last 4 years, where there will be all manner of traditional down home, down south, welcome home festivities for him today. When you think back, it seems like it has not been just 4 years since we all first started trooping down there to take a look at Plains, Georgia. It seems more like 14 years, all that has happened in the interim.
Sat in a couple of rocking chairs and interviewed the president-elect at that point, I think, Tom, when we were in Plains a little over 4 years ago.
He put on my microphone. He didn't even have a union card, but no one interferes. Another son of the South is standing by near there, Kenley Jones of NBC News. Kenley?
Tom, it may be a beautiful day in Washington, but it is a miserable day in middle Georgia. As you can see from the umbrellas, it's just started to rain harder here. I was talking to Hugh Carter, the president's cousin, earlier today. He said this is the first time in 5 years that they have been holding rallies here in Plains for the president when he was running for president and after he became president. This is the first time there has been a rain like this. But it doesn't seem to have dampened the spirits of the people who are here. As you can see, there's a goodly crowd along Main Street, and the president is going to be coming down. Okay, Billy Carter, the president's brother, is on the podium here, and he asked people not to grab him. Okay, Billy Carter asked people not to grab him.
Kenley, we'll be coming back down to you to Plains when we see former President Carter. We're now looking at President and Mrs. Reagan as they emerge from the White House, which they have entered for the first time in their new capacity.
Nancy looks anxious to get to the parade, to the reviewing stand, doesn't she?
She's tugging him along, which she will do from time to time, sometimes by the elbow, pulling on his suit, whatever. He does like to talk. That's James Brady, just to the left and behind him, his new press secretary, who has one of the most visible and demanding jobs in the world. They are moving to the reviewing stand.
The reviewing stand is on its feet, anticipating the arrival of Ronald and Nancy Reagan.
Ruffles and flourishes, hail to the chief. The ceremonial presidency has returned to Washington, D.C. There's a special wooden sidewalk that they are walking along that has been constructed especially for this day. Ronald Reagan first began running for president in 1968. His dream is realized on this day. It must be becoming very clear to him as he enters this position now to join his friends, his supporters, his advisors, his helpmates in this new administration.
Mayor Barry of Washington has arrived.
and Mrs. Barrett. In the blue outfit is Barbara Bush. We'll be seeing them join the Reagans in the front row. Mrs. Reagan giving tiny kisses to her members of her family, including her daughter-in-law there, married to Ronald Reagan. And the president now is talking to his brother Neil and his sister-in-law and saying hello to his grandson, Cameron. A lot of talk during the course of this campaign about whether he was too old to be president of the United States. He remains, after all that he's been through, one of the healthiest, most vigorous-looking 69-year-olds that you can possibly imagine. 49 years old. Whatever. He looks in the pink of condition on this day. Okay, what will happen is that Ronald Reagan will say hello to some more folks. He'll sit down in those chairs and he'll begin to review his parade. And we'll be back with all of that right after this word.
Beverly Hills, thank you.
We continue with Inauguration 1980. Jane Pauley has some late information for us.
Oh, just a couple of items. Almost immediately after the swearing in, our correspondent Bill Lynch reports members of the Reagan staff were installing new color photographs of the President and Mrs. Reagan in frames near the Oval Office. And furthermore, Rex Rannum, a deputy press secretary in the Carter administration, left his successor on an otherwise bare desk a little present for Larry Spinks. It was unwrapped, a coffee mug, it said, with Beverly Hills loves me.
Larry Spinks is from deep in the heart of Mississippi. I don't know whether he's ever been to Beverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
He's a kind of a carryover from the Ford and Nixon days, worked on the Hill, and he'll be a member of the press team in the new Reagan White House, along with Jim Brady, who's the new press secretary. President's in place, the vice president's in place. Here comes Mrs. Bush. We are awaiting the arrival of General Omar Bradley, who is the grand marshal of this parade, to take his position. Talking about conversions, they do it very swiftly. At about noon today, they went in and changed the photographs, and we were watching at 11:58. They changed the flag atop the White House, which is above the White House and above this reviewing stand.
Reached the top, Tom, almost during the 21-gun salute.
I'm from Dixon, Illinois, January 20, 1981. Dixon, Illinois, Ronald Reagan's hometown, back a long time ago.
Tom, while we await the arrival of the inaugural parade itself, you know, there is a second inaugural parade going on today. Perhaps it's over already. In Balporeen, Ireland, there was a parade which probably will draw 4,000 spectators to, well, Ronald Reagan is the favorite great-grandson of Balporeen, Ireland. His great-grandfather, O'Regan, left there in 1849 or so, and Balporeen, Ireland has adopted Ronald Reagan. They have renamed John O'Farrell's pub the Ronald Reagan in honor of the president. They're holding an inaugural parade as well with floats in the works, and they wouldn't mind if a tourist dollar or two showed up on that account.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's the parade as it unfolds down Pennsylvania Avenue, and it will be coming more directly into the view of our cameras here momentarily. A little kibitzing going on, working the crowd in political parlance. There's Mrs. Reagan while they await, and the president. If we can just take a look at the reviewing stand once again, you'll see them over there with their family. Yeah, and we want to show you on this day the homes and the ex-homes and the ex-presidents and the new presidents. We're going to be going back and forth between Washington, D.C., Wayne, Georgia. Amy, Mrs. Carter, President Carter. They have returned, obviously, to a rainy day in Georgia. Big boutonnieres. One of the bittersweet moments of this campaign was when Jimmy Carter appeared before the townspeople of his hometown on the day of the election, knowing probably that he had lost, and said, "I have always tried to keep my commitments to you." And it was at that point that his voice broke and his face was slightly contorted. Finished his speech and returned to Washington, and indeed the prophecy of his pollster Pat Caddell came true in landslide proportions that evening.
Judy Woodruff reported, I believe, Tom, that he knew at that moment.
We think the gentleman with the mustache is Maureen Reagan's intended. We're not sure, but we
Yeah.
believe that he is. There's Maureen, so we're guessed that she would show up on this day with a man that she intends to marry. She said he's real cute, about 6'5" or something, didn't she?
And then we get married in June or July, not in the White House, I asked, probably in California. You remember, Tom, 4 years ago about this time, President Carter was sending little warnings to members of his staff who were cohabitating, if you will, that perhaps they should marry. Looking over the list of guests in the review stand, David Stockman is unmarried, Office of the Budget. He brought a date.
We don't know what he's talking about, but he loves... Ronald Reagan is a man who dearly does like to talk, and he's obviously told them something, and everybody in the reviewing stand is craning to hear whatever it is that he has to say. He's walking back and forth, obviously having a good time, like a man at his own lawn party, which in effect it is. Only in this case, the lawn is the White House lawn, and we'll be back with more. But first, this word. We're back, and we're going to now take a look at the inauguration parade of President Reagan. He is in his reviewing stand position, and we have just seen pass by the Grand Marshal of this parade. That is General of the Army Omar Bradley, followed by the U.S. Marine Band. The President's Own, it's called. They take up their position in the White House reception rooms. Whenever the President has an occasion of one kind or another, he'll be hearing them a great deal in the next 4 years.
This is the Culver Military Academy equestrian unit, Tom. For 5 weeks, a blacksmith was engineering special slip-proof shoes for those horses. 5 weeks, mind you. There's no ice on Pennsylvania Avenue.
However, it was so cold here for one of General Grant's inaugurations that everything froze. The food and 300 canaries that had been brought in to accompany the musicians, they froze right in their cages. That won't happen today because there are neither canaries nor sub-freezing temperatures.
This year they'd be wearing little tuxedos and it'd be real warm.
From West Point, the United States Military Academy Band.
You'll notice, Tom, nobody stops in this parade in front of the reviewing stand until it gets all the way down. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir will be allowed to stop. Nobody else. Keep it snappy.
21-year-old Stan March of Houston is the first cadet to achieve both the rank of brigade commander and captain of the Military Academy's football team since Pete Dawkins in 1959. He's leading the cadets in this parade today from West Point. A long gray line.
Tom, they used to march the entire military academy, all of the midshipmen from the Naval Academy. And I'm told it took about a half hour just to march them all by. They haven't appeared here in some years, all together.
In 1913, you know who marched in that group of cadets in this parade for Woodrow Wilson?
Who?
Dwight Eisenhower. So there may be a future president there again today.
Alexander Haig, of course, is a graduate of that institution. We are, this parade is coming to us by region, not state by state. Not every state will be represented in the parade, but we're beginning with the Northeast, and this is from Connecticut, the Connecticut Governor's Horse Guard. And I told you there are going to be a lot of horses in this parade, and I don't know necessarily one breed for another, but I read that these horses are of mixed breed. Pride of Springfield, Pennsylvania, do you suppose, Tom? Cardinal O'Hara High School, the Bicentennial Marching Band. It was formed during the Bicentennial in 1976, and that's why it is so named. They say many of the bands were chosen, partially cynics would say, because they were telegenic. Well, they sound nice too, but these are red, white, and blue, very colorful, interesting costumes. And they were telegenic.
And award-winning bands. In the O'Hara case, they have received excellent in every competition in which they've been engaged. This is the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's the oldest military organization in continuous service in the United States Army. The group founded November 17, 1774, served under George Washington. Ronald Reagan, a fine judge of horsemanship, appreciating all this. Now, let's go to Plains, Georgia. Portsmouth High School Band. We'll be seeing more of this parade all afternoon. That's from Rhode Island. Now there's Jimmy Carter.
It's going to have plenty of rain. There's no way for me to describe how I feel now, but I would like to say, although I haven't had a chance to see my bed either Sunday night or Monday night, that in the last few hours I've had a lot of very emotional experiences. I won't mention them all, but I would say that one of them was this morning. I won't say exactly what time yet. I got word from sure sources that both planes in Iran were lined up on the runway, ready to take off. That was a thrilling experience for me. The next time was when I came out to Andrews Air Force Base, having had a chance to serve as president of the greatest nation on earth, and stood there with my wife and the vice president and his wife Joan, and heard the Star Spangled Banner played, and they fired the 21-gun salute for our president. And my heart was filled with a realization of what it means to be free, and what it means to be a citizen of the greatest and the strongest and the most decent nation on earth. And I had to fight back the tears. And for the last 14 months, Rosalind and I and the Secretaries of State and others have stayed in close touch with the hostage family. And as George said as I came toward him in Air Force One, Mrs. Schaefer, who is the wife of the senior military man being held by the hostages, said to me, Mr. President, I hope someday you'll have a chance to meet my husband. And I put my arms around and George was watching, and I said, I'll be with him tomorrow, and I'll tell him you love him. That was another experience that I'll never forget. All emotional, and this is the fourth one that I'll mention. It's coming back home to the town where I was born and raised, and seeing the streets filled with my friends. It's a deeply emotional experience for me, and I might say that when those planes were lined up, when they played the Star Spangled Banner, when I put my arms around Mrs. Schaefer, and when I saw this crowd of friends and neighbors, all three were emotional, but they weren't sad. Every single one of them, including coming back to Georgia, is a happy experience for me, and I thank God for it. There are still restraints on me, some self-imposed, some agreements with foreign nations about mentioning the American hostages who have been held so long in Iran. But I have not had a chance yet to make a statement about them. And I thought because of the intense interest in these 52 people around the world that I would say a few words to you about them. Just a few moments ago, on Air Force One, before we landed at Warner Robins, I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared the Iranian airspace on the first leg of the journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free.
You won't tag it off or anything. They're not saying the audio.
It's impossible for me to realize for any of us how they feel on that plane, because they recognize that they are hostages no more, they are prisoners no more, and they're coming back to this land that we all love. Our diplomats will be arriving sometimes in the near future, I can't yet tell you exactly when, in Algiers. The Algerians the last few weeks have been real heroes. They have literally worked day and night, from their president, their foreign minister, the president of our national bank and others, to try to gain the freedom of the American hostages. I want to express my personal and also my political, official, and public thanks to the people of Algeria. They will be flying on 2 Algerian planes, they are now. They'll refuel in Athens, Greece. After they land in Algiers, they will transfer to American planes, and they will fly from there to Germany, land near Frankfurt in a military air base, and go from there about 30 miles away to the hospital in Wiesbaden, Germany, where American doctors and others will be waiting for them. Former Secretary Cyrus Vance will be there to shake their hands and to put his arms around them when they come down from the airplane. I had the plane standing by in Washington with Secretary Vance in charge, and I directed the plane take off the moment the hostage plane wheels cleared the ground. After a brief rest in Germany, 3 or 4 days probably, then the hostages will come back home to be reunited with their families. As suggested yesterday morning by our new president, Reagan, early tomorrow morning, I will leave for Germany to welcome our hostages to freedom. And I know I will take with me
Palmer's here too.
the joy and the relief of our entire nation. Throughout this time of trial, we Americans have stood as one, united in our prayers, steadfast in our concerns for fellow Americans in peril. I doubt if any time in our history more prayers have reached heaven for any American than have been given to God in the last 14 months. We've achieved at the end of this crisis the 2 objectives that I set for this nation and for myself when they were first seized: to secure their safety and their ultimate release, and to do so in terms that would always preserve the honor and the dignity and the best interest of our nation. As I said a few hours ago in a brief press announcement, the essence of this agreement is that as our people are freed, we're releasing a part of the assets belonging to Iran, which I froze by presidential order after our embassy was seized and our hostages were taken. There will also be established a firm, established procedure involving binding arbitration completely in accordance with American law and international law to resolve any remaining claims that might exist by American people against Iran or vice versa. Our people held captive and their families here at home have borne this ordeal with courage and with honor. Our nation acted as a great nation ought to act, not only with justified outrage at a despicable and illegal act, purpose and constant restraint in the face of severe provocation, working always to uphold the law in the face of lawlessness in Iran. We've kept faith with our principles and our people, and as a result, we've reached this day of joy and thanksgiving. In closing, let me say that I want to thank all the foreign governments and people, literally thousands of them, who stood with us for these principles of international law and decency. I thank all those abroad who helped us in these many difficult ways and throughout these difficult months, and particularly, as I said, the government of Algeria. I thank my successor, President Reagan, for the care with which he has approached this issue, along with all the new members of his administration, and the many people in and out of government, patriots like Warren Christopher, who gave me the report recently on Air Force One, and all his colleagues who went and stayed in Algiers the last few days, and who labored to achieve this agreement and this goal. My thoughts at this moment are with the families of the hostages, yes, because they showed such dignity and such patience. And I'm thinking also of those who risked their lives and those who gave their lives on the desert in Iran for their fellow Americans with an utmost show of courage and conviction and a commitment to freedom. In this time of rejoicing, their sacrifice, their grief, their pride, their patriotism must not be forgotten by any American. And finally, I want to thank all of you, my fellow Americans, proud people, not naturally patient, who have stood by me the last 14 months in very troubled times, but thinking always about how can we keep those hostages alive, how can we ensure that they are not injured, how can we be sure they come to freedom, how can we protect our nation's interests. I thank you for your concern, your support, your patience, in a time that has so tested our national wisdom as well as our national will. As I left Washington, I directed as the last act as president that the light of the Christmas tree be turned on so that we can give thanks to God for bringing our hostages home. Rosamond and I and Amy, Chip and Jack and Jeffrey, their wives, my grandchildren, are all very grateful for the honor that you've given us to go to Washington, to live in the White House for 4 years, and to serve there under sometimes difficult circumstances, keeping our nation strong, keeping our nation at peace, binding our people together, upholding the principles and the ideals, the hopes and dreams of Americans that have always made our country great. You've honored us beyond anything imaginable as I walk the streets of this town to sell boiled peanuts to the merchants in the stores here. And we hope forever to honor you with our lives in the years to come in being great Americans and being good Georgians and being good Sumter Countyans and good residents of Plains, Georgia. God bless you. We love you all.
Former President Jimmy Carter making the speech that he had hoped to make as President of the United States about the release of the hostages from Iran, saying things that he could not say while they were still in captivity, among other things describing it as a despicable act. Probably the most touching moment came at the end when he talked to the American people, saying that we are a proud people, not naturally patient. And he was grateful and appreciative the way the American people stood by him as he tried to keep those hostages alive. Mr. Carter will be back in the nation's capital tomorrow morning. He has been asked by President Ronald Reagan to go to Wiesbaden, West Germany, to see the hostages. He will pick up former Vice President Mondale when he gets here, and his White House counsel, Lloyd Cutler, who was deeply involved in the negotiations. He referred during the course of that talk to his hometown people in Plains, Georgia, to a telephone call that he received very early this morning, saying that the final agreement had been reached on the escrow arrangement for the frozen assets. We now have some videotape just released of the scene in the Oval Office when President Jimmy Carter, then president, received a phone call that he had been waiting for the past year or so, in a matter of speaking. 440 days, these hostages have been in captivity. We'd like to show you some of those scenes right now.
Right on, man. That's great. That's great. Okay, now, the next step then. Now, the bank, okay, so the Bank of England has certified the depository?
That was right.
Okay. So that'll go to Algiers, and Algiers, when they notify Iran, will notify us back, right? That's good. That's good.
Little 7977.
Jimmy Carter getting the phone call this morning, early this morning, that he'd been waiting for at least 48 hours, saying that the final hitch had been removed, that in fact All the arrangements had been made to put the frozen Iranian assets in that bank fund in England, and the way was clear finally for the hostages to be released. But they were not released. They did not clear the ground in Iran until shortly after Ronald Reagan had been sworn in as President of the United States. Ultimately, it may have been the final act of the Iranians who have been fighting Jimmy Carter on this matter tooth and nail for 444 days. But today, he finally emerged triumphant in his hometown to announce what was going on. We're now back at the parade, passing before the review stand here.
Statesville, North Carolina, the West Iredell High School Warrior Band. They're from North Carolina, but they're playing Wild Wild West music. The band slogan, by the way, is "May your moccasins make happy tracks in many snows, and the rainbow always touch your shoulder."
Next, the 3rd United States Infantry Horse Platoon, the Old Guard from nearby Fort Myer, Virginia.
Tom, you know what's missing in this parade, don't you? With all of these equestrian units.
They forgot the cleanup units.
They call them tail washers, and they forgot them. So all your bands are, well, you figure it out.
Still another military unit. In a matter of speaking, the United States Merchant Marine Academy staff.
And the Merchant Marine Academy Band is actually trained by the British Royal Marines, and they use instruments that were all made in England. I don't know why. For the American flag, the Reagan stand. That's eyes left, but if I'm not mistaken, the eyes are not making contact with the president. They aren't that far left.
You can see President and Mrs. Reagan in the background coming now more clearly into your picture. They're having a grand time watching this parade. The president actually waving to some of the individual baton twirlers, for example, and kind of giving them the terrific thumbs up sign. Lots of horses. This is the first, well, here are some more horses, as you can see.
In one of those carriages, the two senators from the state of Illinois are riding, Senator Charles Percy and new Senator Alan Dixon. They're gone.
Now the Fort Walton Beach High School Band.
Tom, you know where they're from. The world's most beautiful beaches on the Gulf Coast of Florida. They say that it's the most beautiful beach in the world, and I'm not going to argue with them.
These bands have bake sales and car washes and community drives, sell raffles of all kinds so they can come here and march. Sometimes pretty hard to turn them down. Candidates often going around the country saying, "When I'm elected president, you come march in my parade sometime." The problem is they all have long memories, and only a few of them can.
We're halfway through this parade, and we are watching the first float turn the corner. There are only 2 floats in this entire parade.
600 applicants altogether and about 25 bands. And not that many floats, as Jane says. And we'll be back with more of Inauguration 1980 on January 20th, 1981, the day that Ronald Reagan became President of the United States. But first, a station break. We're back with more of President Ronald Reagan's inaugural parade. They're running about 10 to 15 minutes behind schedule right now. We have bands and the World's Fair float from 1982 representing the southern states.
The balloons are supposed to represent flame. The theme of the 1982 World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee will be Energy Turns the World, and there's some little energy balloons struggling to get out. That's pretty, 5,000 balloons.
They're hoping that this will draw a lot of attention to Knoxville's ambitious plans for 1982. So far, they've decided to give a World's Fair, and they don't have as many acceptances as they may like to have. Thumbs Up. That's the name of a theme song here, as a matter of fact. Thumbs Up America. Lyrics by Sammy Kahn. Music by William Middendorf. You may not remember him as a great songwriter. He's a former Secretary of the Navy, but it's one of his hobbies. And a prominent Reagan supporter. From the University of Tennessee, from Knoxville as well.
And we understand now that the planes carrying the hostages have landed in Athens, Greece. The hostages have touched down in Athens. Well, they will be looked over by the American ambassador to Greece to make sure all's well, and they will be refueling then in Athens. Next stop, Algiers.
Robert McCloskey is the ambassador to Greece, and he has been instructed, we are told, to go on and count noses to make sure that we get all 52 out of there. We've struck a deal. Like any deal anywhere in the world, you want to make sure that your end of the bargain is being upheld, especially when dealing with the people that the United States has been dealing with in Tehran.
That's an Appaloosa horse riding by. I know because I read it. During the course of the Reagan administration, we may all be riding horseback.
I was going to say earlier, he's probably the best horseman to have occupied this office since Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Lyndon Johnson fans may have a lot of trouble with that, but Ronald Reagan is really an expert horseman. Loves the West, has not a working ranch in Santa Barbara, but a riding ranch, and has always had horses around. Whereas Lyndon Johnson used to round up his cattle occasionally with a Lincoln Continental convertible.
Nancy says that Ronnie has always said things look different from the back of a horse. They look about 15 hands higher, for one thing, I should think. He's a jumper, Ronald Reagan is. He not only rides, he jumps.
There's great riding country near Washington, D.C. and Middleburg, Virginia, in those areas. It's called the Hunt Country. He is expected to be riding out there, among others, Senator John Warner of Virginia. I don't know whether he'll ride at the Hounds or not. That's unlikely. He's a Western rider. He has a Western-style saddle. But I think he'll go out there and do some riding.
Here comes the Army. The United States Army marching unit staff. Special meaning, I guess, for General Omar Bradley, don't you think?
He's been saluting all these units as they go by.
Jimmy Stewart got a chance to salute Omar Bradley last night at the gala at the Capitol Center. That was a fine moment.
The unit about to pass by now is from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 2nd Battalion, 504th Infantry, the Airborne. Call themselves the Devils in Baggy Pants.
And they're carrying in 16 rifles. One of the most decorated units in the United States Army.
One of the problems that Ronald Reagan will have to deal with as president, what will he do about the Army? Now all volunteer, many people saying it's time to reinstate the draft, publicly at least. During the course of the campaign, he was opposed to that. It always brings to mind the adage that Washington is a city where old men send young men to war.
United States Army National Guard walking by now. Marching by. Or is that... What kind of cadence is that, Tom? Marching, walking? I'm asking the wrong person.
You certainly are. I can marching by. You don't walk anywhere, I guess, when you're in the Army and you're in uniform. From Chicago, Illinois, we're about to see the Medina Black Horse Patrol. The horses are Morgans, quarter horses, thoroughbreds, saddlebreds, and combination of breeds, but they are all black. That's what they have in combination, and they are all Shriners atop them. These folks spend their own money to come to Washington to march in this parade, and then they get to talk about it for the next year wherever they go, to their friends and neighbors, their clients, people they're trying to sell things to. Proud moment.
The Sohag Marching Band from Hutchinson, Kansas. They're playing, or they're supposed to play, Home on the Range. Is that Home on the Range I hear? Sounds nice in any event. Of the state of Kansas. Looks good too, those brand new uniforms.
We are always talking metaphorically about the real workhorse of any administration. Let us show you now the workhorses of this parade. These are the draft horses. The importance of farm work from the Middle West. Ken Demer's draft horses, Bill Houghton's draft team, and Tom Cameron's mules. Tom's right atop one of his mules there, moving right along.
Tom pointed out that this parade is passing by regionally. We did miss a portion of the parade while we were hearing Jimmy Carter's remarks. Curiously, that was the southern portion of the parade. Some of it went by at that
Let's
point.
hear it for Dixon, Illinois, the Marching Dukes. They're here for a very special reason.
And they're playing Dixon Loyalty. I'll bet Ronald Reagan knows that song by heart.
That, of course, is his hometown. Born in Tampico, raised more or less in Dixon. He's got his hat. You see, we can't see that right now, but the band is there. There's the hat from Dixon, Illinois. They were not originally invited, and they were terribly disappointed, and they received a great deal of attention in their disappointment, and guess who got invited to this parade?
And they bought brand new uniforms to come here, too.
A unit now from the American Indian Heritage Foundation in Falls Church, Virginia, just across the river. The first Indian that we were seeing going by was Iron Eyes Cody. You remember him? He sheds a tear in that wonderful public service television commercial on the environment. These are 11 Indian leaders representing some of the various tribes of North America, of which there are hundreds.
We'll welcome the Trojan Band from Chesterton, Indiana to Washington, D.C. in the inaugural parade. State champions in Indiana for 3 years in a row. And that means something. Now look at those uniforms, Tom. As I said before, the bands were chosen in part because they sound good, they perform well, and they look great. Those are great uniforms. Trojans from Chesterton, Indiana.
More horses. This one from Dallas, Texas, the Hello Horse Patrol. I think that there are almost 500 horses altogether in this parade. Fitting for this man who is so fond of horses. Ronald Reagan just signing something handed him by his aide, Mike Deaver. And they're having a conversation, which we are not privileged to hear at this time. Mr. Reagan listening in as well. We'll get, as they say in Washington, a readout on that. We hope later from Jim Brady, the new press secretary.
President has very thoughtful look on his face. That's business, presidential business he's considering, don't you think?
We're now seeing a couple of, these are people who were representing the military units that went on by, coming to greet him, and they'll stand there as the United States Marine Corps staff goes by, as you can see. This drum and bugle corps is called the Commandant's Song. From Middle America.
The Purdue Glee Club. We were all in love with them at one point or another.
Well, those of you who grew up in Indiana as impressionable young co-eds, no doubt, were in love with them.
They were worthy. Probably still are. That float, by the way, was towed to Washington from Indianapolis on the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
And somehow they worked Alaska as well. I'm not quite sure their sense of geography at Purdue, but they're awfully good engineers, and they turn out great ball teams out there. And I'll hear from Purdue, no doubt about that. And you'll hear a station break in just a few moments.
Willard.
Stand, in this case, the Jackrabbit Marching Band from South Dakota State University, Brookings, South Dakota. South Dakota State, a fine agricultural and engineering school. Now, we have a unit of, these are Alaskan dog sled teams, and famous Alaskan dog sled teams. Some of them were, filched for a time, but they found them out in Maryland somewhere over the weekend. At any rate, they've got their tongues a-wagging because it's not exactly Alaska weather here. It's pretty warm, and they're on wheels, not on their runners. Part of these people, some of these people, Joe Reddington Sr. specifically, famous for racing along some old dog sled trails in Alaska, all the way from Nome, from Anchorage to Nome, also climb Mount McKinley. From Sacramento, California, the Sheriff's Mounted Posse.
Ronald Reagan himself has ridden with this unit as governor of the state of California. And I'm wondering why this Sacramento equestrian unit, Tom, is in the Middle America section. You can't blame this on Purdue.
Well, they're just letting you know that Western America is coming next. I think that's the idea. There was one story afloat that Ronald Reagan was tempted to ride the new Arabian stallion that he received from Mexican President Lopez Portillo in this parade, and then was counseled against that. We don't know whether the story is true or not, but he could have handled the horse. There's no question about it. It would have made a dramatic entrance into his new administration. Now we move into Western America, as we've been saying here right along. From Boston, Massachusetts. That's why it's Western America. We give Sacramento to the middle part of the state, and then we...
At the time of the old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, Tom, Boston was the West.
Not as far west as you could go or wanted to. United States Navy Band. Not the Naval Academy Band, but the United States Navy Band. You may have heard them in your hometown. They tour the country regularly. Average age of these young men passing by now, 18 years old. They're out of the Recruit Training Center.
The President's eye view of an inaugural parade. From out of the west, the Barons, Fountain Valley, California. You know how they got here? Every member of that band wrote President-elect Reagan a personal letter. We'd like to come be in your parade. It worked.
The side of Washington, D.C., you're looking over the grounds of the White House now. That's the Pennsylvania Avenue entrance. The front gate of the White House. And now we are looking off in the distance at the Treasury Department. In the foreground, you see the reviewing stand. The Presidente Andalusian horses, stallions, which carry their ancestry back to the same horses that brought to this New World Spanish conquistadors. The traditions of the Old West are deeply rooted in this country, not just when we have a Western president, but whenever we have an inaugural parade. Now, representing the United States Air Force, Color Guards Marching Band. These used to be all-male units, but now there are 6 women, we are told, marching with the United States Air Force Band. Women take more and more positions in military services.
There are men who aren't accustomed and women who aren't accustomed to walking. It's the United States Air Force Squadron.
Well, it takes people on the ground to keep them in the air as well, in the Air Force, as they will tell you.
Harry Truman had a flyby. I think there's been one since, if I'm not mistaken.
That's the Air National Guard going by right now, followed by the Air Force Reserve, I believe. Park Rangers, mounted ranger patrols from guess where? Cleveland, Ohio. An important city, one that Ronald Reagan no doubt will remember. It was there that he debated Jimmy Carter 1 week before the election. Many people believing that it was what made a lot of people in this country decide to vote for Ronald Reagan as president. And they saw them in that one-on-one confrontation in Cleveland.
Any police officer who rides a horse will tell you that the best beat cop there is, Tom, is that horse.
We'll be back with more of this presidential inauguration, January 20, 1981, the 40th President, Ronald Reagan. But first, this station break.
Wednesday on Real People.
But no one is...
Are we in the wrong track?
Shower to shower each day, now there's a fresh new way.
Introducing new improved Shower to Shower with cornstarch. It has a unique combination of cornstarch to absorb wetness and baking soda to help neutralize odor better than regular powders. Helps keep you drier, fresher, odor-free.
New shower to shower each day, now there's a fresh new way.
New improved Shower to Shower with cornstarch.
WSM TV, Nashville, Tennessee.
It continues now with units of the United States Coast Guard passing in review in front of their Commander-in-Chief, President Ronald Reagan. The parade is moving along swiftly in front of us here, but it is considerably behind schedule by now. They thought it might be wrapped up at about this time or a little earlier, actually. But no one is complaining. The President seems to be having a very good time. From San Fernando Valley, California, the California Rangers, a riding group, carrying the state flag. They rented these horses, by the way, in the Washington, D.C. area rather than go to the expense of having them shipped clear across the country. From Clovis, California, coming up now, the Golden Cougar Marching Band. We're going to show you a plane now that is on the ground in Algiers. That's a medevac plane that came out ahead of the hostages. They are on a 727 that has refueled in Athens, Greece. May still be in the process of doing that. This plane was in Tehran, left there ahead of the hostages, and now has arrived in Algiers, where the hostages will arrive as well. It is obviously a time difference of almost 12 hours, so it's very late at night now in Algeria. And landing now
Tom, this medevac plane, if I'm not mistaken, can handle virtually any medical problem there is.
They went from Wiesbaden, West Germany, to Tehran to take a look at the hostages. You remember there was an inspection of the hostages by doctors. And they are now coming into Algeria. They left ahead of the hostages, obviously. This dramatic story will be unfolding all night long. The most dramatic portion of it yet to come, of course, our first look at the hostages. We've cleared all the airspaces of Iran. They are now in Athens, where they are refueling. They are being inspected by the American ambassador there, Robert McCloskey. And then they will go on to Algeria, and they will go on from there to Frankfurt, West Germany, and then be transferred to the military hospital, the American military hospital in Wiesbaden that we've all had such a close look at in the last several days. One of our correspondents who's been posted in Algeria during the course of this long story is Keith Miller, who's there now. We are told that the audio line, the sound may not be the quality that we would like, but we'd like to hear what he has to say nonetheless. Keith?
As you can see, the second of the C-9 Nightingale medical evacuation planes has just arrived here in Algiers. The two planes came in from West Germany. The former hostages, when they appear here, are expected to be on the ground for about an hour and a half before departing for West Germany. While here, the 52 Americans will be given a quick check by the military doctors aboard these two planes. They have already been checked in Algiers, of course, and there are Algerian doctors aboard the plane that they are coming on. The first members of the medical team have departed the plane. They're waiting for the second plane to unload. There are some of the members from the plane. While here, the hostages are expected to be greeted by the Algerian intermediaries and, of course, the American negotiating team. There's some talk that they will be given a change of clothes and certainly some fresh coffee. The medical team is now moving into the VIP lounge where they will set up all their equipment for, as I said, a preliminary check of the 52 Americans. This is Keith Mills, NBC News at Algiers International Airport.
Yell in my ear, just tell me. We're back in the reviewing stand now. So we understand that those medevac planes were flown from Frankfurt, West Germany to Algeria, where they will meet the hostages when they arrive there on a 727 jetliner that came out of Tehran earlier today. They are now accompanied by Algerian doctors. Understandably, the United States, as grateful as it is to Algeria, would like to have its own military physicians take a look at the doctors as well. We're coming up on the final float in this parade, and it is a remarkable one. It contains the members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, as you can see it, drawing slowly down Pennsylvania Avenue. It will be the final entry in the inauguration parade for Ronald Reagan.
And the only unit in the parade that will be allowed to stop. Tom, this is a bagpipe unit. Before that float arrives here, this bagpipe unit from Salem, Oregon. It followed a horse patrol unit from Lake County, Indiana, the Lake County Sheriff's Posse. I mention that because for 48 hours straight, the Lake County horses had to listen to bagpipe music, so that when time came for them to march in front of the bagpipe unit in the parade, they wouldn't be scared. Tabernacle Choir.
it speaks for itself. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir with one of the most stirring songs in the world, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Members of the Reagan family visibly touched by it. Mrs. Reagan losing her composure for just a moment.
And I believe President Reagan himself was blinking.
Neil Reagan, a tough old bird, the
perhaps.
president's brother, had to remove his glasses and dab at his eyes. No doubt thinking back to when they were children together in Dixon and Tampico and small towns in Illinois. Their father, an affable sort, a shoe salesman, though, had a more fondness for liquor than he might have been better for his family if he had not been so fond of it. But anyway, they've come a long way today. President of the United States, a grand day for him, obviously. The hostages have been freed. He is president of the United States after seeking that office for 12 years now. And tomorrow, the real work will begin for him, as he outlined in his speech today. The economic problems of this country are considerable.
General
Omar Bradley, who was Grand Marshal of this parade, 5 stars, General of the Army, the only one with him.
There's a hero.
Reagans will go back into the White House. There will be a large reception there tomorrow for many of their friends and members of the Washington establishment.
And tonight they go dancing all over town. 9 inaugural balls. They'll stop at each one. I know they'll dance at least at one of them, but the Reagans are dancing people, and maybe they'll find an excuse to dance at all of them.
He does like to dance. He that kind of grew up in that 1930s and 1940s big band music. General Bradley once again. Reagan's speech was short today, and it was plain spoken. There will be commentary about the absence of eloquence, perhaps. But in my judgment, at least, it probably was the speech that the American people was waiting to hear from this man, promising not poetry, but solutions to problems. And he'll find them there when he gets inside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, not just with the economy, but with the defense sector, the Commerce Department, with education, cutting the budget, with dealing with Congress. Someone I knew who worked in the White House says you have no idea what it's like finally to step in there, something that you've sought all that time, and then finding the problems coming in under the door, through the transom, around the corner, through every crack in the building. But it's been a good day for this man, and ultimately for the man that he is succeeding, Jimmy Carter, who was able to return to his hometown of Plains, Georgia, and announce, as he had hoped that he might as president, the hostages were free, that the American people had supported him, and he was grateful for that, describing them as proud but not naturally patient. And they are out, so far as we know, all 52 alive, and we pray well. We will be getting a medical evaluation of them when they get to Algiers, and they are being counted now in Athens, Georgia. Athens, Greece.
Ronald Reagan got his new beginning, just as the theme of the parade. And what is a new beginning anyway?
A great new beginning is how he was described during the course of this campaign. That's the official theme of this. Well, you don't want to be too specific about those things. The only thing that he has been specific about is that he will move quickly on economic matters, the tax cut, cutting the budget, and address that almost instantly. We'll see in the next several days what they have in mind. Because now the campaign promises are over, the transition rhetoric comes to an end, and performance counts. They're moving across the lawn of the White House and into their residence.
Bill Lynch reported earlier, Tom, in addition to hanging the color photographs of Ronald and Nancy Reagan outside the Oval Office shortly after the swearing in, the staff there in the White House that stayed behind was already talking about redecorating plans.
Sure.
Every family likes to leave its own stamp on the White House. To a degree, the Carters made it very much a house and not so much a mansion. There was a dinner once where Rosalind was seen welcoming the guest herself at the front door, and when dinner was over later that night, Jimmy Carter walked the guest as they left individually to the front gate, waved goodbye, just Jimmy in the front of the house. Now, I don't know how the Reagans will.
Well, they can be pretty down home, too. People who visited them at the ranch in Santa Barbara, which they hope to get to. That's Mike Deaver. They're walking alongside. You'll see a lot of him. We're pointing out these people, and their faces because they'll be so familiar. Just to the right of him is Edwin Meese III, who will be very close to the president. Chief of Staff, in effect.
And will they always have something under their arms like that, Tom?
Yep.
Little business there.
It's unending. When Gerald Ford first came into office, he tried to carry it all himself, and the pile got larger every day, and he finally gave it up. Newspapers, papers to sign, things to look at, whatever. And there, for my money, one of the best-looking pictures in America, the White House. Side of triumph, side of tragedy, side of achievement, side of failures from time to time, and we will see what it will hold for Ronald Reagan in the next 4 years. The gathered guest leaving the reviewing area, the longer hair there, is Billy Graham. Familiar profile. We'll probably be seeing him a fair amount in this White House. Marvin Calva standing by not too far from here. He's at the State Department where he has the latest on the hostage situation. What do you hear, Marvin?
Well, what we hear, Tom, is that the plane, of course, is in Greece. Ambassador Robert McCluskey is going to greet all of the 52 hostages. And it is important to point out that this greeting on the part of Ambassador McCluskey is not in the way a policeman does it. This is a greeting that would be quite natural. He would be the first high-ranking, indeed perhaps even the first official American to greet the 52 hostages. There was a news conference here not too long ago, but it is embargoed for 8 o'clock tonight, so we can't give you the substance of it. But when Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Muskie left on his way to Wiesbaden, we talked to him about his general feeling, and of course he said he is elated. He feels that, like one of the hostages himself, he has been sprung, liberated. There are a couple of other points. This is clearly a tremendous accomplishment on the part of the outgoing Carter administration to be able to wrap up this long, lingering crisis just before they actually left power. The other side of the coin, it is a tremendous relief for the incoming Reagan administration that it does not have to deal with this crisis. It now can pick up the foreign policy slate reasonably clean. Another major point here, all officials are pointing out or expressing their enormous gratitude to the government of Algeria. And Secretary Muskie said to us that we can now expect an improvement in the bilateral relations between the United States and Algeria. It's not a quid pro quo. There is nothing specific, we're told, that we have promised Algeria, but the Algerians can now expect perhaps better economic terms, perhaps aid, perhaps a putting off of any debts that they owe us. And the final point is this, just as there is this gratitude for Algeria, there is this continuing kind of split-level bitterness towards Iran. Secretary Muskie was asked whether the Iranians might have held back, not allowed President Carter to get the full benefit on his turn, on his watch, so to speak. And Secretary Muskie, expressing what might be some inner bitterness, said they would be tempted. They are capable of acting that way. So at this particular point, the slate is clean, except for one thing. The European allies of the United States are already rushing to try to work out economic diplomatic terms with Iran because of its central pivotal position strategically vis-a-vis the Russians, economically because of their oil. It's just a matter of time, it seems, before the United States itself begins to strike some better relationship with Iran as well. Tom?
And the thing that we're going to be watching very carefully, one of the first acts of the Reagan administration perhaps will be a kind of general announcement, a new policy about United States attitudes toward the taking of American hostages, members of the diplomatic corps at embassies around the world. The early warning system sounded yesterday by incoming Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger on the Today program, and I think that you can look for that fairly early in this administration because there are some volatile situations around the world.
Well, we have concluded that part of the hostage story with wheels down in Greece, in Athens, Greece, and we have an inaugural parade that is wrapped up too. President and Mrs. Reagan back in the White House, President Carter back in Plains, Georgia. Everybody's home or coming home.
The ceremonies are over. Ronald Reagan is President of the United States. The entire country wishes him well. He has a great deal that he hopes to accomplish, and we hope that he is successful in that. The real work begins tomorrow morning after the inaugural balls tonight. We'll have full coverage of those inaugural balls. John Chancellor will be here with NBC Nightly News, and whatever we can bring to you about the hostage story, we'll bring it whenever it occurs here on the NBC television network. NBC News will stay atop of this story. Thank you all for joining us on this remarkable day in American history. January 20th, 1981. Good afternoon.